Chapter 4. Arriving early at school the next morning, Matt found Paul and Ryan waiting for him. Without a word, they jerked their heads toward the hedge, and Matt followed them down to the river. Surprise! The three girls from their class were already sitting on the long grass with a large plastic container between them. It's Pancake Day, one of them said, smiling at him, a year 8 tradition. We decided every Thursday would be Pancake Day, as long as it's sunny. Matt beamed back. This was Susan, small and lively with short brown hair and a really neat figure. You guys bring the maple syrup and orange juice, and we take turns at bringing the pancakes, offered Shelley, the leggy blonde with the light blue eyes. We thought we'd let you off today since this is your first week. Shelley seemed okay, yet Matt felt uncomfortable around her. She reminded him of someone, but he couldn't think who it was. So, how do you like it here? Asked the third girl, Bronwyn, as she passed Matt a thick pancake slathered in syrup. It's getting better by the day, he answered, eating it quickly before the syrup trickled down onto his shirt. Is this really a tradition? It is now, Ryan said, his mouth full of food. A few months back, we figured that since we can't go to Mickey D's on the way to school for a pancake breakfast like you city kids, we'd make our own. This is heaps better than Mickey D's, Matt said, leaning back on the bracken and looking up at the tree ferns arching overhead. That's a sad place in the morning, full of lonely people and too many hungry kids buying breakfast. This is brilliant. The six of them chatted about nothing in particular until the school bell rang. Matt wondered if there were any particularly close friendships going on, but he couldn't be sure. They rinsed their sticky hands and cups in the river while Susan packed up the remains in her backpack. Your turn for the pancakes next week, she reminded Shelley. We need some more maple syrup too, guys. That breakfast was Matt's introduction to what he came to think of as the Year 8 family. During the days that followed, he realized that the five kids had known each other all their lives and knew each other's families equally well. They knew his grandparents too. In class, they cooperated readily and without fuss, which is just as well as their year frequently worked unsupervised. Matt wasn't used to being trusted with so much independence, but he liked it. He also enjoyed the way the others included him in everything, and even found himself practicing rugby passes one lunchtime. Just as well as sports practice often meant either rugby or netball, girls and boys playing together. With the end of term approaching, there were tests to revise for and assignments to finish. The teachers allowed very little time during the day to talk about the Hero Project. They checked that no one was having difficulties and then left it to the families to supervise the writing of the stories at home. This wasn't unusual, Matt gathered. He wondered how to bring up the subject, but needn't have worried. Nan mentioned it the day after the pancake breakfast. Everyone at my yoga class today was talking about the school book, she'd said, handing Grandpa a mug of tea after dinner. Even the 5-year-olds are writing hero stories, I hear. You're thinking of choosing Archie Baxter, Matt? Maybe. I haven't decided. Mom and Dad are both from such small families, I don't know of anyone else to write about. Mom's got no relations that I know much about. Maybe Dad's got some cousins on your side? He asked his grandfather hopefully. We're a small family too, Nan answered. I can't think of anyone else where enough's known to write a story about them. As for Archie, you must make up your own mind, Matt. People like him caused quite a stir in this district years ago, I've heard. She smiled mischievously at Matt. Before your grandpa proposed to me years ago, he told me what it was like for him being a pacifist in the district where so many families had lost men to war. He wanted to make sure I knew what I was up for moving here. She tossed her gray curls at the memory. I said that, being Irish, I could stand up for myself. Also, I happen to agree with the conscientious objectors. Irish women and children have always been left alone while their men went off to fight in one war after another. Even when they're home, they still fight each other, to keep in practice, as it were. And do you know what used to rile me the most about it? Her eyes flashed behind her glasses as she looked at Matt. He shook his head, laughing. Those mad fellows come back from their wars all battered and bruised, missing bits of themselves, and go straight into the pub. They drink themselves silly and sing self-pitying, sentimental songs all about themselves. Not a thought for their long-suffering families left alone to manage. That's why I married this man." She patted Grandpa's tanned and wrinkled hand. "I'm still a Celt, though," Grandpa teased. "A Celt with some Scottish sense, I'm happy to say." Matt couldn't help smiling at the pair of them. "So were people mean to you, too, about pacifism? Like with white feathers and stuff? Grandpa told me about them." "They wouldn't dare," Nan flared. "But yes, there's a deep feeling here about war. Anger, too, at terrible losses. Some soldiers feel guilty at what they've done and for surviving. Guilty people look for someone to blame." "In Archie's day, this country was tougher on its pacifists than on most other nations," Grandpa added. "The government practically encouraged people to be hard on them. Mind you, one of our later prime ministers was so against military conscription he spent a year in prison for sedition. Peter Fraser was locked up in 1916, but that was nothing compared to what the military did to the Conchies." Nan nudged him. "Maybe that's enough, Pete." "It's okay, Nan," Matt said. "I'd like to know what happened to Archie. I heard a bit about his trip to England, that's all." "It's a terrible story, Matt. Are you sure?" Nan looked doubtful. "I'm sure. If I'm going to write about him, I either learn this stuff from you two or I read his book." "Okay, then. Here goes. I'll fill out what you've heard already." Grandpa looked at the ceiling and then at Matt. "Tell me when you've had enough and I'll stop." He cleared his throat and began. There were thousands of Kiwi conscientious objectors, and to show that government meant business, 14 of the best known, including Archie and 2 of his brothers, were forced into the troop ship Waitemata and sent overseas, as I told you before. Before they left, they'd already faced enormous abuse aimed at breaking their spirit so they'd obey military orders. But they didn't want to be soldiers, so they couldn't and they wouldn't. Archie was eventually sent to a terrible place they called Mud Farm in the western part of Belgium, where he was tied to a post out in the open, hands strapped behind his back, feet roped up off the ground, and left to hang like a dead man for hours every day. Sometimes another man was tied alongside him. Matt could hardly believe what he was hearing. Grandpa's voice was strained and his knuckles showed white against his mug of tea. It was the Kiwi version of field punishment number 1, tougher than the toughest military punishment there is, Matt. They call it the crucifixion. No matter whether it was snowing, raining, or blazing hot, he was tied up like that every day, given no food or water, and often beaten afterwards. It went on for sometimes for weeks in a row. The men were barely conscious when they were cut down. Grandpa coughed awkwardly. "Did Archie die?" Matt heard his own voice sounding shaky. "Nope. Somehow he survived, and he still refused to follow military orders." Matt was incredulous. Surely they let him go home after that. "No, Matt. They were even more determined to break him. I think they were a bit afraid of him by then. So next, they dragged him out to a battlefront where the worst fighting was going on, certain he'd begged for a gun to defend himself." "Did he?" Matt had to ask, although he already guessed the answer. "No. He said it turned him off from war even more, if that was possible. During a bombardment, almost all his company was killed, and he was found half dead and taken to a French hospital. He was in bad shape with memory loss and other problems. To cut a long story short, eventually he was shipped back to New Zealand." "So he survived all that? He must have been incredibly tough." "Yes," Grandpa smiled. "An inspiring character. He must have been damaged, but he lived on until he was 88. He had a very full life." "He deserved to," Matt shivered. "It's hard to believe people could be so mean to someone they knew just because he wouldn't fight." "Yes," Grandpa agreed. "Some officers just couldn't understand that Archie would never support war no matter what they did. That takes courage." "It's time for our Scrabble game." Nan's voice was firm. Matt Matt leapt up gratefully to fetch the battered old box. He set out the game on the table, and Freddie, the big farm cat, jumped onto a chair and leaned forward, whiskers quivering as he studied the board intently. He's planning his first move, Nan said lightly, reaching to smooth his fur. He never misses a game. Neither did his grandparents. Matt knew how they relished their nightly Scrabble game. Each tried to outdo each other with carefully placed obscure words so they could add to the legendary scores that were recorded in a special notebook. Matt remembered Dad talking about that notebook and the scores that went back for over years. He joined Grandpa in the game and managed to place oxen on a triple word score, earning an approving grunt from Grandpa. Later, as she looked in at his bedroom to say good night, Nan lingered in the doorway. I don't want you having nightmares, she said. There's something important you should know about Archie. During the war, many of the ordinary soldiers liked him, even if they didn't understand him. He was a decent man, and they felt bad about what was being done to him. They took real risks, giving him their chocolate rations, offering small kindnesses when they could. He wrote about that in his book. He was very grateful. She wiped her glasses, which were rapidly misting up. You needn't feel sorry for him, Matt. What he did was a free choice. Some of the more humane officers used to offer him war work away from the battlefields instead of his punishments, but he refused because to him it would mean giving into the world of war. He just tried to understand and keep caring about humanity. To me, that's real courage. Matt felt a lump in his throat. Thanks, Nan. That's good to hear. Yet as soon as she left, Matt felt his old fears invade him, and he lay staring at the high ceilings with its white plaster moldings and fly-speckled light shade. Okay, so Archie was brave, no doubt about that. But was he? It was going to be hard enough being the stuttering idiot trying to give a speech. But if he'd written about someone who refused to join a war while the others chose relations who'd fought and probably been killed, would his new friends see him as a coward as well? Heck, it was 100 years ago. Surely people had forgotten. Maybe not old Cedric, but probably everyone else. Yet, how could he be sure? There was no way of knowing. What was Archie Baxter to him anyway? How come Dad never mentioned him or any of his family tradition of pacifism? Matt really wanted his time at Dad's old school to be okay. Dad had asked him not to do anything that would worry Mum. Any extra stress would make her lose the baby, the doctors had said. When Mum had made him promise not to worry Nan and Grandpa because they were getting old. What did they think he was, a troublemaking machine? And if he wasn't allowed to talk to anyone, who was there to help him with his worries? Me, he decided. There is no one else, so I have to take care of myself. It's just that I don't know what to do. He went over his options for a long while before falling into an uneasy sleep.